Welcome everyone to TEDx Talkback. My name is Linda Liu and I'm the Marketing and Communications Director here at TEDx YYC. So the Talkback initiative gives us the opportunity to speak to past TEDx speakers, and it's really an opportunity to dive deeper into their idea worth spreading. So today we have a great guest, Siila Watt-Cloutier. Siila is a Canadian Inuit activist born in Nunavik, and she's become one of the most influential Indigenous, environmental, cultural, and human rights advocates. So in 2016, Siila actually spoke on the TEDx YYC stage, and her talk was called Human Trauma and Climate Trauma as One. So today we're going to explore the importance of protecting the Arctic and the Indigenous community. Thank you for joining us today, Siila. I know you're all the way in the Arctic. Looks really beautiful out there. We're really excited to have you on the show. So let's begin with your 2016 TEDx talk. You spoke about your traditional life upbringing, and essentially it consisted of hunting, gathering, fishing, traveling by dog sled. What would you say is your fondest memory from your childhood?
My fondest memory, I think, in my childhood is, of course, the communities, the sense of community and being with family and being out there in nature and just getting the bounty of the land and the sea and coming home at the end of the day just so blessed with everything that surrounds us and everything that we could possibly need. We had. We didn't miss anything. We didn't lack anything. And it was just that kind of bond to my culture that really has set the foundation for who I was to become today. And so those are the memories that really stay with me. And they guide me to this very day. Family, community, culture, tradition, food, country food.
Those are really beautiful memories. So speaking of tradition, in your talk you talk about traditional Inuit teaching that is learned on the land, sea, and ice that people live on. So there's the life skills that are taught, such as how to be a proficient provider, a natural conservationist, and even a seamstress to produce warm clothes. But then there's also all the character skills that are learned from survival basics, such as patience and courage, sound judgment, and wisdom. I really believe that those are skills that every child should learn no matter where they grow up. So how can we integrate traditional teaching with institutional?
So the traditional ways of learning for us is very holistic as Inuit and Indigenous people of the world, where the technical aspect of the hunt and the character skills building is not separated from one another. But institutional schooling or learning separates those two, and it's never really replaced elsewhere. So I would say that it would be of great difficulty to try to do that, replicate that kind of holistic learning in an institutional schooling system. So for me, it would be land-based programs. Be out there in nature. Let nature teach you about yourself, because technical aspects are how the world works, but character building and life skills are about how you work. And that idea or the way in which character skills are built are really from nature, out on the land. So I would say build more programs, even if you're in the South, land-based programs that help you connect to our planet and the environment and the cycles of life. And that way you learn a lot more about yourself.
I love that, land-based programs, and just really connecting with nature, the cycle of life, and our planet. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about June, which is the Indigenous Peoples History Month. And this is a time to celebrate the remarkable Indigenous culture, but it's also a time to create awareness and understanding of the trauma and the tumultuous changes that have impacted the Indigenous community. So what can we do to get more people engaged, learning, and understanding about the Indigenous history? And then once there is awareness and understanding, how do we translate that into actions?
Well, I think the first thing that everyone should be learning and being open to with utter respect is read from Aboriginal books, number one, and learn from Aboriginal people and really open-minded, open-hearted know this history of colonialism and the kind of impact historical traumas have had on Aboriginal communities of not just our country of Canada, but the world. And that we are not just victims of globalization and colonialism. We are people who know the connections between a sustainable way of living and what we're dealing with today. And so learn from us. Allow us to be your teachers on what sustainable lives and development is. We have a lot to offer in terms of lessons and learnings for others. And once you start to learn that, do not, and I repeat, do not be on a mission to save us, because that is at the root of the many problems that we face. It is not a one-up, one-down relationship that we want. We never wanted it, and that has never worked. So it's to learn from us and allow us to lead on these issues of things that we know so much about. But most people have come to see us as victims only, and that must stop. And we must be part of the solution, because I believe the Indigenous wisdom is the medicine we seek on creating a sustainable world on so many levels.
What you just said there is so powerful. I think when we treat people as victims, it weakens them and it takes their power away. And exactly what you said, we need to stop treating the Indigenous peoples as victims and let them lead, let them be part of the solution, and let them be our teacher. So I think what you just said is just so meaningful, and that guidance provides clarity on how to move forward. And now when I think about our world today, it just feels like we're at a tipping point. The global pandemic is happening right now. Climate change can't be ignored anymore. And people have had enough of racism and they're standing up. And we're witnessing this right now with the Black Lives Matter protests. What do you think about everything that's happening right now?
Well, what's happening with this pandemic has got me thinking a lot about the work that I've been doing on environmental degradation and climate change for the past 20 years, trying to signal to the world on what is happening to our planet. And so what this pandemic, and I had never realized, until this hit, I always thought something is going to give in this world because people aren't paying attention to what's happening to our planet and to the climate changes that need to be addressed so urgently. I never realized it would be a virus that would wake people up. Not only wake people up to the destruction we have been doing to our planet and to the habitat of wildlife all over the world, but what it has done is awoken a world to how we have been so disconnected to everything that matters. And so including the social injustices and the racism of those who are in most need of help during this pandemic. The Black Lives That Matters is a movement it's remarkable how people are starting to stand up. The Indigenous peoples that are most negatively impacted with the weakest health systems are being exposed, and the weakest health conditions that people live in Indigenous communities and in Black communities. So it's time for this world to wake up to these realities and address them for what they are, which are long-held, poor systems that are racist, and they're not helping this for us to come to common ground on any of these issues, whether they're environmental issues, whether they're health. They're all interconnected and interrelated. And so once you see this being exposed, then that's what we have to address. Environmental degradation of the habitat of wildlife in the world, which is the beginning of why these viruses are coming out the way they are, and the social and structural racism that exists and reigns in so many of the most vulnerable in the world. Look at that picture and learn from that lesson.
I completely agree. Everything is interconnected and interrelated. And we need to address all these issues holistically and together. So let's take a few minutes and dive a little bit deeper into climate change. In your TEDx talk, you talk about the second wave of change impacting the Indigenous community, and that's the melting ice in the Arctic. And it's not just about the impact on the Indigenous community, but really this is going to impact everyone, or is impacting everyone in the world. And the way you explain it is that the Arctic is the health barometer for the rest of the planet. Sometimes I find it frustrating that some people are still not taking climate change seriously enough, and they're not making changes in their behaviors. So how do we convince people that climate change in the Arctic isn't isolated and that the melting ice is going to impact everyone? And now is really the time to start acting before it's too late. We need to shift our behaviors.
Yes, so for almost 20 years now, I have been indicating to the world, to the audiences that I speak to, that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. The Arctic is that cooling system. It is the air conditioner for the planet. And what happens there really affects other places in the world. So people have been turning a blind eye to these messages for so long now. And here we are living these states of emergency since a long time because our culture depends on that cold, on that ice being solid, and the weather patterns not playing havoc with our hunters as they go out to hunt and provide for their families. But what's happening now, after 20 years, the signals that we gave out for so long are now starting to show effect and impacts elsewhere. In other words, the states of emergencies that we have lived with are now starting to show up as droughts, fires, floods, hurricanes, all of those terrible, horrific situations that other people are now starting to experience their own states of emergencies in the southern parts of the world, and now starting to wake up to say, what is that Arctic connection? And how is it that we could be somehow being more aware of these connections and do something about it? Because there's no insurance that covers most of these things, that people are now losing their homes and their livelihoods. And they're starting to understand that a little better, but much more has to happen in terms of understanding that and what we could be doing together, whether you're in Florida, whether you're in Toronto, it doesn't matter where you are. What happens in the Arctic impacts everywhere else, and we need to understand that better and really deal with it. Not just, again, as I said earlier, it's not just economics here, it's not just politics, it's not just science. This is about our common humanity, our common humanity, to be trying to address these issues of where do our next generation go with all of what's happening now.
Yes, this absolutely is a collective and shared issue for humanity. So we're running out of time, so we have to wrap up. But my last question for you is, can you tell us what you're working on right now?
Well, when I left elected politics back in 2005, I became an independent speaker and an author. And until the pandemic hit, I was very busy. In fact, I was getting busier because of that better understanding that people were starting to have in terms of climate change and the connection to the Arctic and its people. But then the pandemic hit. And so what I'm doing now are some of the virtual talks are starting to come through, but I've been doing a little bit of writing and reflection as a result of the kind of perspectives that change when your whole livelihood comes to a halt. And like most people, we've been self-isolating, and I certainly have been here in my Arctic home. And you think a lot, and you reflect a lot, and you change perspectives as well on various fronts. So I'm starting to do a lot more writing, smaller articles, but nonetheless, on making that connection between what's happening with the pandemic and the work that I've been doing all these years. Because the reflections that I've had and some of the awarenesses is that, again, as I said earlier, never did I realize it would be a virus that would bring things to a halt. And what I mean by that too is the industries and the businesses that have come to make a sudden halt to all of that has created a clearer atmosphere almost overnight in many cities. And there's some wildlife even that has shown up that haven't been around those areas in many decades. So it tells me that there's hope in this world, that if we address this issue as urgently as we need to, things will become better. The air will become clearer, our wildlife will become healthier, Indigenous cultures will be safer and stronger. And so for me, it has given me that picture of what it could look like if we address this issue of environmental degradation and climate change in the right, urgent way that we need to.
That has also been a big takeaway for me, that the pandemic has halted things and we're seeing the positive impact. Like you said, cleaner air and healthier wildlife and Indigenous cultures feeling safer and stronger. Thank you so much, Siila, for your strong voice on all these interconnected issues and for helping us wrap up this conversation today on a note of hope. I really enjoyed learning from you, and I believe our audience gained a lot from this too. And thank you everyone for joining us from the audience. This was a really important conversation and definitely an idea worth spreading. I also want to take a few minutes for some closing remarks. TEDx Talkback will be paused for the month of July and August. We are actually in the midst of preparing for our main event for TEDx YYC, and that's happening this summer. So it's really exciting. We will be announcing details soon, particularly about the unique format that we have chosen. With social distancing, it will still allow us to meet up in person safely. And that's pretty much all I can say for now. The event will be taking place at the end of August. And watch our social media and sign up for our email to stay tuned, and we will be announcing all the details very soon. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you, Siila. It was such a pleasure to speak with you.